Okay, hello. Morning. So this week in lecture is kind of our second full week of like big uniting theme kind of thing about how life works, and then how anatomy stuff is going to attach onto it. So we started last week with 2 weeks ago, a little bit on senses. And then last week was all about reproduction, the most important thing any living thing can do evolutionarily, no value judgment on you humans, is to reproduce yourself and go into the next generation. That is literally how life works. And then so that was last week, and some anatomical and a little bit of behavioral adaptations animals have to reproduction. This week's all about diet. So diet is really a way of talking about the food organisms eat, the way they get their energy, the way they can live and grow and move and do all these things. And so a huge amount of interesting information about animals and their biology, and especially their anatomy, has to do with their diet, how they get that food. So there's one of the greatest animals on the planet. This is one of those things that you're like, should be so stoked that it's alive right now. And in theory, you could go see one. It's insane. We'll talk about it later. We're going to start today talking about diet, though, because we're talking about food. In the gnarly void that is the universe we live in, that is mostly empty space and radiation, and it's all horrible. You live on this little blue marble that has a lot of water. Where does energy come from for organisms that live on this planet? Where does energy come from? Talk to your neighbors.
Light.
That looks so aggressive.
All right, I'm hearing you guys chat. What are you talking about? Where's energy coming from?
The
The sun is a great starting answer. Anywhere else?
Isn't there like deep sea like thermal vents that animals get energy from like the core of the earth?
Is this familiar? The one we're talking about here? So energy on this planet, for the most part, the food web, the food chains that we all live on, certainly the ones you and I live on, are driven by the sun. So take a minute and let it in if you haven't. Everybody knows the sun. I know you guys know that. But it's amazing to think of this at this point, 4.5 billion year old nuclear fusion reaction that is right now putting sunlight into that space, has been just radiating energy in a sphere as big as itself and going out this far. 93 million miles away from that sphere is a little ball, that's us. And so we get some ridiculously small percentage of its radiation, and that makes the basis for everything that's alive on this planet. And I just think that's really insane and worth letting in and being that's a lot. So life gets energy, but it only does that because certain organisms on this planet have evolved the ability to harness that energy. So you guys know about things like photosynthesis. Plants are the most famous example because you can see them all the time, but there's plenty of eukaryon and really originally, as you guys know, bacteria that evolved the ability to photosynthesize. Some of those bacteria became things like chloroplasts in certain eukaryotic cells. There's plenty of single cell eukaryotes that can photosynthesize because their chloroplasts can photosynthesize. And then of course, plants are all over the land, and there's some plants in the oceans that also photosynthesize. These are the basis for the food chain. We call this autotrophy. When plants, if you give them an atmosphere that has carbon dioxide in it and sunlight, and they have roots that can take in minerals and water, they make their own carbon sugars by taking carbon out of the air and using the sunlight to drive the process. So they self-feed, even though of course they're taking in raw materials from the environment. Plants are self-feeding. That is the basis for so much of our food webs. But Addison's absolutely right. There is an asterisk that humanity didn't know about until the 70s, which is there are a couple places where another possible source of energy that does of course exist is the actual radioactive hot core of the planet we all live on. And so in a couple of places where there's thermal vents that are chemically complicated, there's many different kinds of these vents. Some of the ones that are most well known are the ones called black smokers, where there are bacteria here that evolve the ability to build a metabolism around the chemical outwash of these vents. And then there are worms and crabs and fish and bigger fish that are in these little tiny ecosystems in the bottom of the ocean where tectonic plates are touching sometimes. Other times it's just in the middle of the ocean, where there are like Earth's radioactive heat is the actual source of energy for a handful of ecosystems on this planet. But it is truly mostly the sun. I think that's pretty cool. So that's what's really doing all the autotrophy. Those are plant cells, and then those plant cells, you can really see all the chloroplasts they have in their cells. And so these plants have the ability to make their own energy. And so these things, those bacteria on those deep sea vents, and then any plant or algae or kelp or whatever you want to say, these are all called things that we can call these things primary producers. They can make organic compounds from the energy around them. They are the basis for the things that we're going to build on today. Here is that giant tree of eukaryotes you guys saw a long time ago with a lot of really specific names. Eukaryotes are extremely diverse. Way over there in green is plants. Over here in this purple group are both things like animals and fungi. We are both in this part of the eukaryotic tree. And we are not making our own food. Only a couple of the eukaryote lineages, those green ones and a couple others, have the ability to photosynthesize because they have those chloroplasts in their cells. So the ancestral diet for eukaryotes is not autotrophy, it's heterotrophy. You have to eat somebody else. And so eating somebody else, taking in another kind of organism, and this is a terrifying video of one protist taking in another protist, and you can see the other one realizing it's been swallowed. I don't know what it means to realize if you're single cell, but it gets enveloped and then tries to get away, but it is far too late. You have been eaten. So eating another organism is the source of energy for you guys, absolutely. You do not go out into the sun and autotroph. So the point I just want to make here is that heterotrophy is ancestral for life and certainly ancestral for our for life. What can I say that? Certainly for our clades. And just to give you guys that context, our part of I don't know why I edited that to life. It shouldn't say life. I'm sorry it says life. I'll change the slide. My point I was trying to make here is I want you guys to think about the tree and realize eating other organisms to get your food is ancestral for certainly our part of eukaryota. All of these organisms together, you could put a tick down here, like heterotrophy. Eating a different organism to get your energy is the usual condition. That's not a surprise. So where are heterotrophs actually getting their organic compounds? They're eating the autotrophs, right? So we can use fancy names. If you guys have taken ecology or talked about ecology, there's these words we can use to talk about a little tiny plankton eating another little single cell algae, and that's a primary consumer eating a primary producer. This zebra eating some grass. The grass is the primary producer, the zebra is the primary consumer. And then as you go up the food chain, we use these other words. So here's this baby zebra whose mom is too far away, and we can easily call that lion a secondary consumer. But the initial energy made by the grass goes into the zebra metabolizes, lives its life. Eventually the zebra might get got by a secondary consumer like this lion. And that lion is then ultimately getting its energy from the grass, ultimately going back to the sun. I know these are things you guys know. Another little factoid that I think is pretty interesting is across lots of different food webs of different types of organisms, there is a roughly, it's not solid, a roughly like 10% or 90%, what we should say, 90% drop off in like the energy efficiency. So like the energy that the grass makes, when the zebra actually is in there using its metabolism, using its body, it's taking about 10% of what the grass can produce into its body. And that transition happens also for the lion. So the lion's getting like 1/100th of what the grass is doing, the zebra's getting 1/10. That makes sense. And so the farther you go up the food pyramid, there's all kinds of interesting things that happen. So I know these are not new ideas to you guys. I just like to put them out here because we've been talking about evolution quite a lot in this class and not a ton about ecology. And so talk to you just for a quick second about these two different food webs. One is an African savanna and one is the Antarctic actually, oceans. What are we trying to see from these webs and how are they different? All right, what are some things you guys are noticing? Because this is, I just threw these are obviously pretty simple and they're cartoons, but it's a good example of an ocean food web and a land food web. But what are we noticing?
The ocean food web almost entirely, or actually entirely relies on phytoplankton as the primary producer.
Yeah, the actual autotroph in the system is not this and not this. It's just the phytoplankton, the different kinds of photosynthesizing plankton. And so there's tons of things that are related to green plants like green algae. There's also other kinds of algae, reds and browns, but then most of it is single cellular. There's all kinds of different eukaryotic organisms that can photosynthesize. They make up the plankton, the phytoplankton, the photosynthesizing plankton, and they are this foundation of the food web. On land, it's like there's a grasses, bushes, trees. How does that influence things?
Well, it looks like the savanna areas will have a lot more of the primary consumers versus like, you get just grill pretty much most things. Somehow get their energy from grill.
So these are very tiny single-celled things. These are gigantic structures that you can like chew and move around on, you could live on. So plants as photosynthesizing autotrophs versus some of these phytoplankton photosynthesizing autotrophs mean really different things. That lion is only a step removed from the tree, just like that lion was only a step or two removed from the grass with that zebra example earlier. Whereas like the orca eats the seal, who eats the fish, who eats the krill, who eats the plankton. Marine ecosystems can be a lot longer, and the foundation is truly the photosynthesizing autotrophs. But in terms of like mass on the landscape, a lot of the time it's like some early primary or even secondary consumer that is like the thing that everybody actually really eats. If you look at what's eating it going up and up and up. That's really different. The oceans and the land are really different. For today's class and for Thursday, one thing I want to emphasize to you guys is the different categories that are involved here. And those are shared sometimes between ocean and land, but other times there's just specifics in one or the other. And so you know a lot of these words, carnivore and herbivore, eating meat, eating plants primarily as your diet. But even within those categories, there's really interesting anatomical adaptations we're going to talk about for specific kinds of carnivory. Obligate carnivores are only eating meat, like 90% or 95% of their diet is straight up meat or at least other organisms. There's scavenging specialists. There's insectivores, which is a very specific kind of carnivory. You're only eating insects maybe. Herbivores, so plant eaters. Obviously, there's a million ways to eat plants. Plants are incredibly diverse. And there's tons of very specific ways you can be, and many organisms have become herbivorous, specialized herbivorous. Detritivores are not a lot of vertebrates are detritivores, so there are a few. That's like eating the detritus of an ecosystem, the sludge, the mud, the bottom of the ocean, the bottom of the lake. And then things like omnivores are these like kind of categories that humans have where we're just like, this thing is a generalist. You are an omnivore. You eat plenty, well, maybe you guys don't personally, but you do eat plenty of meat, plenty of plants, plenty of fungi, plenty of all kinds of other things, and you're comfortable doing it. Plenty of things that we made up, like Cheetos or something, right? So you are a generalist omnivore. lots of other animals in general, it's omnivores. And there's things that we can know and predict about the evolutionary success of organisms as they specialize in different ways or as they stay general in different ways. And it's really fun to see how, like, when animals really commit to something, in this case, we're going to talk about some diet examples, their whole anatomy is focused around that. So now we're not talking about heterotrophy, we're talking about actual dietary categories. So here's an early vertebrate phylogeny, most of the early splits anyway, these are all living organisms. I think you guys recognize where we are and what these organisms probably are at this point in this class. Just a really simple exercise we can do right now. If the steak means you eat other animals and if the lettuce means you eat plants, that's what I would put on there. What can you infer about vertebrates and the ancestral vertebrate situation and as vertebrates evolve that you could draw from this tree? Just taking this as is, you don't have to add in any special thing you think you know, just taking this tree. Okay, talk about that. Wait, thanks. So what do we suppose the likely diet is of the ancestral vertebrate? Carnivory, how come? Just articulate it for me. Almost all of them. If you follow back the shark and the stingray, right, you're gonna say, I bet their common ancestry meet just like they do, because based on this tree, I have no reason to think otherwise. I could add every single shark and every single ray, and you could have 1,200 pictures up here, and 100% of them are gonna say meat, and you're gonna be like, it'd be really weird to try to declare that it was an herbivorous ancestry, right? So meat probably here, meat maybe there, meat there, meat there, meat there. Everything about this is letting you know that carnivory is almost certainly the ancestral state. So then what else is going on? Evolutionarily, how would you like to describe what you can see otherwise?
Herbivory is something that's been independently evolved enough times.
So there's what we get, this is again, not trying to trick you guys. It's like, okay, so two of these animals, there's two fishes up there that are herbivorous fishes. And so looking at this tree, a solid inference you could make is that herbivory has evolved twice. The parrotfish, you don't have to know what these are, but that's a parrotfish and that's an angelfish. Parrotfish and the angelfish, maybe they've evolved herbivory independently. So herbivory has evolved from carnivory twice, is an inference you could make. This is the ancestral condition. And then within teleost fishes, maybe this happened, right? This tree could be explained by only you knew this tree. Herbivory evolved for the parrotfish lineage and herbivory evolved for the angelfish lineage. It's totally possible that herbivory evolved back here, and then the parrotfish and angelfish inherited herbivory, just like these other ones did. And that bass up there that eats other animals has reverted to the ancestral condition. Does that make sense? So there's like two possible things based on what you guys see here that could be true. And it's really hard to choose between them because they both are the same amount of evolutionary change. And the fact if one, it's one change, switch the diet, but it's hard to know which one's which. So what I actually wanted you guys to talk about for a second, what additional information would you need? All you have are these 10 organisms, wherever it is. What additional information would you need to choose between these two? Okay.
Yeah, the back. That's like yeah, because of the back.
All right, what are some things you could use? What's more data that would be helpful to you? There's a ton of possible answers.
So if we just had more examples of Telios.
What if I should put up another 60 Telios and 59 of them had the meat symbol and they were all right there, right? That could help you choose. What else? Yeah, Connie.
So, not exactly this, like the sleep act or the back
Good.
from, like, is it they know before those two? Like the.
You mean like in time? Because that's where, that's where we know it goes, maybe in evolutionary relationships, but it could have gone older. Yeah, they're all alive right now, which is the thing. I heard people talking about fossils. Yes, of course, if you found fossil parrotfish that have big sharp teeth, you'd be like, oh, sweet. Independent evolution, maybe. Anything else people can think of?
If you can find fossils, you can use like genetic information of them and like their mouth structure and stomach structure, maybe.
You can do all kinds of comparative anatomy stuff. You can learn more about the details of those three organisms. What if the bass has like the same plant eating kind of like infrastructure in its mouth, but doesn't really use it? There's all kinds of things. The point I was just trying to get you guys to do here is like stretch your legs on like the hypothesis testing using the tree. Yeah, okay.
I was gonna say, similarly, you can use development biology,
Absolutely. And what could you maybe do there?
see like if the bats developed, plant eating mechanisms, and then undeveloped them, if it does.
Absolutely. Just like a little whale baby has legs for a second and then they go away. It's like, now I know. So this is just an example, just a little exercise and get you guys thinking about trees. I can tell you for sure what I want you to take away is that carnivory is the default and herbivory evolves from carnivory. It happens a lot, but it almost always goes that way. There are famously, I'm not going to talk about them, extremely few examples of a clade of organisms that are herbivores, and deep within them, somebody goes back to being a carnivore. Very uncommon. But carnivores have part of their family tree go into an omnivory and then maybe going for plants thing. That happens all the time. Herbivory evolves again and again. Carnivory is the default. That's what I want you to take. So this is definitely how this tree really is. So just as we're going into this part of the class, so diet, next we're going to talk about locomotion. We're kind of bouncing around a lot. So the beginning of the class was we went through all the vertebrate biodiversity so you guys would have like a good sense of all the different types of organisms. And it was very tree focused. It was focused on the evolutionary relationships and on the synapomorphies, on the characters. But we're kind of getting to this place now where we can talk about ecological thinking. There's a lot that giraffe shares with herbivores in the oceans, even if that's not clear, and they're not related at all, right? So there's an ecological way to think about things and an evolutionary way to think about things. So as we're moving through this part of class, and as we go into actually the part for after the second exam, I want you guys to, we're going to be bouncing back and forth between these like similar comparisons we can make that are sort of independent of phylogeny, and then things like this, where we can look at the animals in a very like reductive way about how they're related and talk about evolution of something like herbivory in that way. Just want to stress that. All right, now let's get into the good part of class. Today is all about the meat eaters, or the other animal eaters is what we'll say. So there's a really wonderful animal that absolutely eats other animals. Now, alligators do sometimes eat water plants just because, so it's not 100%, but there's an alligator. Talk to each other. Let's get a nice big list here going. What are the characters that carnivores have? If you're eating other, and this is a vertebrate now, so I'm gonna say carnivore, truly eating like a meat diet, eating other animals. What are the characters you guys are gonna expect carnivores to have? There's a lot to think of here.
They usually have this larger.
They're usually bigger.
That is small. Or much bigger. Or bigger. Right now.
Right, exactly. I like to be good guard.
All right, what are somebody who hasn't spoken up yet today, what are some features you're expecting carnivores to have generally, no matter what kind of animal they are?
Sharp teeth.
Sharp teeth. I'm gonna call that, so things that they can attack with, things they can get you with. Teeth is a very common one in vertebrates. What other things? Do they all have to have sharp teeth? I don't even know. All kinds of things. Oh, sharpness, everyone's saying sharp, okay? That is a good word association. Carnivores are sharp. They have red eyes. They're scary. Okay.
Speaking of eyes, usually their eyes are pretty good. And binoculars are very common as well.
So you might have good eyesight. Other ideas, other things? We're thinking now ecologically, so across all different kinds of animals that might eat other animals, all different anatomical adaptations they would have to do the whole process. From being like, there it is. Yeah, Calvin, we can.
Usually some sort of adaptation be quick, so it's sometimes they're like hamburgers, sometimes chase after one.
So like adaptations for pursuing, for getting their prey, you gotta find your prey, pursue your prey, attack your prey. Yeah,
We talk about how they generally have a smaller GI tract or shorter GI tract.
oh, tell me about that.
Plant matter, but upper for body to process, then like they don't need as long as this like GI tract. And they don't generally have that big like stomach as well.
They're gonna have similar, like digestive requirements to each other. So what Andy's talking about there with like how herbivores tend to have like very long guts, or very thick guts, or very big bellies. You guys now have seen that carnivory, eating meat, carnivory is the default condition for vertebrates. And then I would encourage you to think about herbivores, not as like carnivores don't have that. Carnivores don't have that. It's like, no, that elephant like spent millions of years evolving a big stomach. So you should be like, oh, the lion doesn't have the big stomach. No. Think about it like the lion has the base condition, and which is a relatively short digestive tract. I will tell you this, meat is easy. Because what is your body doing as you digest anything? It's turning it into your body. It's reducing it down to its smallest components, little protein components, sugar components, and it's making it meat. So turning zebra meat into lion meat is physiologically not a big deal. Turning wood into beaver meat is difficult and crazy. So herbivores tend to have a lot of more. We're gonna talk about herbivory on Thursday. You're of course correct what you were saying. But I encourage you guys to think about it kind of in that context. Herbivory is definitely the weird condition, the evolved, the derived condition. There are, of course, digestive requirements, and I'm gonna say like, maybe even food processing adaptations that carnivores absolutely have, and they have to have because of what they're eating. What are the things? Can you guys start to like look at this list and like build an animal? Like be like, okay, I'm gonna think about an eagle. Okay. Right? I'm gonna build that alligator. It might not be eyesight for the alligator, but it might be. What other features might you expect to see amongst carnivorous animals?
Like just looking at the alligator here.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of your, like, maybe that's part of your attack, and a little bit of your food processing. Depending on what you eat, right? If you grab full on, this is an alligator, so it doesn't really, but if I had a crocodile up here, if you grab a full on wildebeest, you're like, come on, I'm drowning you. You have such strong jaws. These are all interesting things. I appreciate the specifics some of you provided. I want to encourage you to think about the bigger categories, because there's going to be different ways different vertebrates do these bigger things that unite all carnivores with completely different kinds of anatomy. And that's kind of what I hope is interesting in a class like this. So let's talk about the first one, finding prey. I'm calling that on my slides, search and detect. Search and detect your prey. If you're a plant eater, probably you can just put your face down or walk over to the plants and eat them. If you're a carnivore, you have to find the other animals to eat. They might be herbivores, they might be carnivores too. You still have to find a thing that can move, right? So talk to each other for a second. We're gonna have a couple of these slides in a row. These are all different kinds of vertebrates. You don't recognize them all. Of course, I'm not expecting you to. That all have very different and interesting anatomical adaptations to searching, detecting, finding their prey. So talk to each other about these for a minute. What's going on?
I mean, the box is exactly.
I mean, it might.
The box is also.
All right, so any examples that we want to talk about? We don't have to go through all of them. Hammerhead. So hammerhead's got electroreception, passive electroreception. So it's not sitting there like creating a magnetic field around itself. It's just moving around in those little ampullae of Lorenzini in its face. If there's a stingray under the sand, which is what is happening in that video, it's coming by and then its left-hand side hammer was like, so go. Electrosensory, there's a stingray underneath that sand. So that is an extremely cool adaptation that chondrichthyans all have, those electrosensory structures. So yeah, maybe you cannot see that stingray, maybe you can smell it. You definitely can electrosense it. Osprey's doing the eye thing, a lot of raptors. That's what everyone was probably thinking of, maybe when they said eyesight, cats, raptors, they all have this like forward-facing binocular vision. Osprey have incredibly good vision. They can see very far and very accurately and have very good depth perception. They also have adaptations that let them see through the water. The fish might look like it's here, but really it's here because of the refraction, and the osprey knows how to correct for that. So catching a fish from a lake, special eyeballs, special electroreceptors. Anything else up here?
Black heron.
The black heron is fun because it's just a completely normal heron, but this has a behavioral adaptation. This is an African heron where it walks around in the water like this and creates a shadow so there's no glare. And it moves really slowly. So it's just using its wings, which of course it flies with and does all these other things with, to like create a like no glare situation for itself. There's also examples of the black heron standing like this, like just bored. And then eventually fish start to gather because it's like a shady spot. And then it goes like, you can get it. The fox is using its ears. It can smell a little bit, but mostly using its ears to hear rodents deep under the snow. So the fox is going to do a jump where its feet are up in the air at the end and it goes down. That goatfish has sensory barbels. It can touch the sand like this, and it's gonna find a worm or a snail into there. That boxfish is one of my favorites. It takes in water. It has a very long mouth, very precise little mouth right there. That's the mouth, eyeballs. Wait, where's the meter stick? And they actually do this extremely cute thing where they just scoot around the sandy parts of the reef and go like, and they just blow the sand away. So they're gonna blow the sand, and there's gonna be somebody who's like suddenly exposed and they're just suck them up. And then the turkey vultures get a great sense of smell. So that's search and detect. You can see the sensory structures are integrated here. There's very different ways of detecting, finding prey to even start your process of trying to eat them. You still have to find them. All right, let's say you find some prey. Now you got to get them. So here's a bunch of different organisms, all carnivores, that are going to be pursuing their prey. So talk to you about different anatomical adaptations they seem to have for that process.
Run really hard. Switch out.
All right, what are some uniting features here of the pursuit part of predation? Carnivory, if you think of that. Speed, right? Fast. Some of these animals are ambush predators. They might sit and wait, they might be moving around themselves, but when they actually get in their prey, it's a short burst of speed they might have. It's a short time they have to capture. The cheetah, famously, you guys all probably know, the cheetah is the fastest land animal, but cheetahs can't go that fast for that long. They have to sneak up. They have to get close, and then there's an ambush. And yes, it's very dramatic, and they run 300 yards, but it's still a burst. The wolves are running. The wolves work as a team, and they're endurance runners, just like human hunters are. Humans and wolves are really similar in the fact that we hunt in groups and we can go for hours. And so maybe that deer or that, whatever you want to think of it as, an antelope running from people in Africa, a deer running from wolves, absolutely is faster than them in the moment, but they're going to chase it for 5 hours. And eventually that deer is done, is so exhausted, and they can get it. So this is like the best time of year right now in Yellowstone for all like the wolves to catch elk, because the snow's really deep and the elk gets so tired. And so they're really successful during this like lean time of year, because these are teamwork endurance hunters pursuing. This is an ambush predator that has a burst of speed. What other things are going on? The cheetah's got extremely intense adaptations that I'm not going to get into the details of, but to make it be able to run 60 some miles an hour, there's a lot going on in that cat skeleton that's not like other cats.
What's the monkey do?
Mahi-mahi is also a nice bursting ambush predator. So its eyeballs are down here. This is its face, right? Eyeballs down here. These are mostly surface fish hunters. So like flying fish, little fish that are trying to hide in the open ocean. So there's no rocks or anything. And the only place you can hide if you're a little fish is like in the little like surface. And so there's tons of little fish that live up here, and this is a predator of them. It cruises really close to the surface itself, so you can't see it coming. And then it has an extremely sharp, powerful tail, huge muscles for a burst of speed. So this is like an ambush predator of like little fishes in the surface waters. All it is muscle, just like that mako. The mako is a shark related to great white sharks that is also like a kind of relentless pursuer. This thing can chase down like tuna. It can go 40 miles an hour for a long time. Just follow you. If you want to get freaked out, Google a YouTube video of a mako with like people having a camera off the back of a speedboat, because they can get the speedboat going to like 40, and the shark is just like, its tail is like a blur, but it's like right on the boat the whole time when it gets going really fast. And that's pursuing like a wolf is pursuing. Whereas the dolphin fish or the mahi-mahi is a burst predator, just like the cheetah is a burst predator. Goanna is a big lizard in Australia. You can see it's got relative for a lizard, a very long body, very long legs. It's a very fast runner. Australia has an invasive rabbit problem. Goannas help with that. Peregrine falcon, I can't not say something about. Peregrine falcon is an animal that, as far as we know, is the fastest vertebrate, but certainly the fastest vertebrate in the world today. Maybe it's one of the fastest animals ever, because when they go into dives, they can get to almost 200 miles an hour in their dive. And so what they'll do is, if you guys ever see like a flock of pigeons or a flock of ducks that all take off at the same time, the peregrine will just like go 200 miles an hour through them and like break one of their backs. And so they'll explode through one of those pigeons, and then as they go to like slow down, the pigeon's like body is falling, and they'll turn upside down and get it. This is also one of my favorite hawks. This is the secretary bird. This is an African hawk. It is a hawk, and it is a snake specialist. So all it does is stamp out snakes with its big feet, chases the snakes down, runs them down. It's a cool bird. All right, speaking of these sort of like ambushing or pursuing adaptations, I want to talk about, this is a very general slide. I want to talk about a very specific example. These fishes are all lurking predators. Their ecology is called lurking. They sit there. Talk about the morphology of these 7 completely unrelated fishes, please. Big balance. Give me any observations of these 7 fishes. Give me anything. Long bodies. What else?
Powerful tails.
What do you mean by powerful tail?
Like, they have a lot of surface area, like on their caudal fins, except for the gar.
Yeah, the gar's a little different, but still. Yep. What other things?
Long noses and snouts.
Pretty elongated faces. Yep.
Camouflage going on.
Take a minute to appreciate the exact placement of like dorsal fin or fins, anal fin, pelvic fin. Like look at where their fin arrangements are relative to each other.
Like all the way to the back, near their collar.
So these fishes, I can tell you, they lurk, and then littler fishes, you have a little bit too close, and then they all are burst predators. They go and grab somebody. This is a famous fish from coral reefs all over the world, Aden Nemo's mom. Here is a big fish that lives in like freshwater lakes. This is another open ocean fish. These are some South American river fish. What is important for me, and I hope you guys can be like, that is insane, is how these fishes have evolved the same hunting ecology. And their close relatives don't look like this, but they've all converged on this same structure where here's where the back of their body is, and then they have a little bit of tail. There's all this muscle. Dorsal, anal, and caudal fin all work together to give them like a really fast burst out. And they're very long, so you don't really see them from the front very well. Their whole body is like this, so they can be like hiding. They don't look like a big long fish to you if you're a little one. They're just a little face in the seaweed. And then they can burst out of there and gobble you up. It's so cool to me that the ecology of these fishes makes them look so similar. That is crazy. They all have relatives that look completely different from this relative to each other. They don't have a common ancestor that shares this morphology. But this general body plan in Actinopterygian, these are actually almost all Teleos, not the gar, fishes have this like way that they've been driven. This is the optimal body plan for ecology if you're an Actinopterygian. I think that's really beautiful and really fun. There's tons of examples of this from all over the place. I want you guys to take it in. It is extremely cool. An example of convergence amongst all these different fishes. Also, I like that this is like a baby angelfish that's just like hanging out next to the angelfish. All right. So we talked about search and detect. talked about pursuit. Now let's say you get your prey in close range. Adaptations that you guys started with. The ones that are actually scary to you as a primate who used to get eaten a lot more than you do now. These kinds of adaptations. Talk to each other about these adaptations.
I mean, yeah.
Basically.
So what's like a good one-word summary for all the things you're seeing right now? Sharp, right? So I intentionally picked these animals because these are all predators, these are all carnivores that are eating meat, meaty things. They are not using the same kinds of sharpness, right? These are claws, these are claws, these are teeth, these are teeth. They are all sharp, and there is a sharp beak and sharp teeth behind the claws of the bird and the cat, but they're all still different parts of their body that are sharp. These are all animals that are gonna grab you and you're meaty. You can imagine there's other animals though, that are like eating meat, but it's like crushing shells or things like that. And nothing about them, like a stingray, nothing about the stingray biting you is sharp. It's a crusher. So there's other ways to be an attacker. You don't have to be sharp, but I like the sharp thing because you guys are right. A really good example of ways that you unsuspectingly could be a cool attacker is this archerfish, which you guys asked about when we were doing. This is a predator of insects, but the archerfish lives in the waters of South America, mostly in the Amazon, but then oh, sorry. That is true, but they also live everywhere else. They live in Australia and Africa. So archerfishes hunt for bugs in the branches above them, and then they have this special chamber in their throats that lets them shoot a jet of water, and they're really good at it. So they can attack in a very fun way. That has nothing to do with being sharp, but it does have to do with like getting you closer to them, which is like really fun. So these are the classic sharp adaptations, teeth and claws. You guys knew this one right off the bat. Obviously, you can see other adaptations they already have. Anything to talk about here? This is the easy one that you guys all expected to see.
Kind of, we talked about how not all of these are the kill method.
Oh,
They're just, some of them are just like how the animal gets its prey in range.
I use these to grab you, but really I'm gonna grab you. That's what a crocodile does. I use these to pin you down, but really I'm gonna bite your spinal cord. I use these to grab you, but I'm really gonna use this to just tear you apart while you're alive. I use these to grab onto you, but I'm gonna squeeze it so you can't breathe anymore and asphyxiate you. Right? I am gonna use these to eat you, and that is. So, but you're right though, right? These are about the attack, the moment of like getting the prey item. But of course, there's other things that can happen. I want to talk about some extremely cool, I think, specializations that very different animals have to accomplish their goal. So it's fun to think of sharks and crocodiles and like, oh my God, they're going to kill me, because those are like a handful of the animals that maybe could hurt you. But of course, more broadly, there's all kinds of very special ways carnivores do this part of the process, the getting the prey down part of the process, that are really fun. One of the great evolutionary specializations of all time are the fangs of different snakes. Vipers, the Viperidae, things like rattlesnakes are the most extreme example. Cobras also have the ability to do something like this. There's a couple other snakes that do have other kinds of fangs, but these big forward-facing fangs that rotate out are specific only to vipers. So we have them in Idaho. We have rattlesnakes in Idaho. And so think about what an incredible set of adaptations this is. You guys already know the snake skull is insane and has extreme amounts of mobility within it. The bones can move relative to each other much more than in most other vertebrates. But on their maxilla, they have at any one time one functional tooth. Here's a nice replacement fang that's growing. But here's the one functional tooth that actually is a hypodermic needle. It has a sharp tip, and then up from the tip just a little bit is a hole. That hole is a hollow that goes up through the tooth to where there's a venom gland in the side of the head. The snakes have the ability to like keep that part of their own venom like quarantine. They're not completely immune to their own venom. So it actually activates in a lot of ways when they bite in. So there's a lot of physiological and metabolic adaptations here to even have venom that might mess with the proteins of your host, venom that might paralyze their nervous system, venom that might clog up their blood and just do things with their circulatory system. Snakes do not have the nervous system. Sorry, vipers don't have the nervous system one. But so this is a really extreme thing. So this is an animal with no limbs, and the only teeth it really has for prey capture are these big things, and all they do is deliver deep into the body tissues of the animal a venom that does something like make it go rigid, make it go into cardiac arrest, like that. That is particularly cool. I want to show you now a non-American viper, just so you can like watch it stretch a little bit.
Doesn't that also mean they have to be able to digest as well?
Yeah. That's usually not such a big deal though, what the digestive tract. So I'll let you guys watch this puff out or yawn for a second. Do you love it? Snake head flexibility is truly incredible. So you can see that there's different parts of the skull that can like move separate on the roof of the mouth, the brain case where the eyeballs are, of course, the jaws. And so there's a lot of different names for snake fangs. Cobras do not have fangs like this. When you see like whatever, like Aladdin or something, and Jafar turns into a big cobra, and it's like big. Cobras don't have big, scary fangs. Their fangs are far back in their mouth. They'll still get you with them and you might still die. But they're not like this. Only rattlesnakes and vipers, viperids, have the front facing big fangs. So hypodermic needle is a pretty extreme adaptation for attacking your prey. Here's another one I really like. This is a carnivore. It's got really sharp teeth. Doesn't eat meat though. Only eats blood. Anybody know anything about vampire bats or how they do their feeding?
They just like bite off a patch of skin and like their saliva stops the blood from like clotting, so they just like hang out and like lick it up.
So vampire bats are some of the most comfortable bats on the ground. They've got really nice, this is their thumb. So the rest of their wings folded up, and that's where the other fingers are. But there's a big thumb. They can run around on the ground. They kind of look like frogs. If you ever see like night footage of them, they just like hop like this. They run around on the ground. They'll sneak up on a goat or a sheep, or if they're back in like the rainforest, like on a tapir or a deer or something. And so they have all kinds of adaptations for their specialized diet. They use these two teeth, which are their canine teeth, actually to like shave a little bit of hair away, like where the hoof meets the foot. They will like shave some hair off, so it's exposed skin. They will use these teeth to make an extremely precise little incision that is so fine, it actually might not be felt. Their saliva helps dull the sense of the feeling of the cut. And their saliva helps the blood not coagulate so that the little wound just like drips blood all night long, and they just sit there and drink the blood of this cow all night long. And the cow has no idea, and it's a very great thing. This is still insane to me because this is like bats are the only flying mammals. This one has evolved to run around on the ground and sneak up on animals and mammals for the most part and drink their blood. Crazy dentition to do this. These are incisors that it uses to make a cut. These are canines it uses to like make a little shave spot. Otherwise, not really a lot of teeth. The teeth are pretty reduced because all they do is drink blood. But these are the real vampires that do exist. So there's where the sharp teeth really are, not your canines. Down there. Pretty cool. Vampire bats are not the only vertebrates that are blood specialists. There's plenty of birds that are too. You guys probably know oxpeckers. If you ever watch a documentary about Africa, there's always these brown birds on the back of every rhinoceros and every zebra and every giraffe flying around. Yes, they are commensal mutualistic animals with like a zebra or a giraffe because they will eat ticks and they will eat parasites, but also they keep the wounds open for a long time. So if you're a giraffe and you've got like they pulled a tick off you and now it's like bleeding, the oxpeckers are gonna like pull your scab off every day and just drink your blood. So the oxpeckers are not completely great for animals. It's like a balance of a trade-off, right? They will drink your blood and eat your ticks. They do both. Probably my favorite example though, and this picture is always shocking to people, is this finch from the Galapagos, which is the vampire finch. So it's one of the finches that part of Darwin's finches, the like radiation of finches that are endemic to the Galapagos. They all have their own special ecologies. There's two of them. What they do is they come up to seabirds that are nesting. This is a big bird called a gannet that goes out and catches fish all day. And all they do is like go up to that bird and like pull on the skin at the base of a feather because it's really highly vascularized, and they just get it to bleed down. And I don't know why these birds just like sit there all day, but they do just sit there all day. And this is a finch that all it does is sit there and drink the blood of these seabirds all day. So a little bit of sharpness, but very different, right, in terms of prey capture. Fun. Now I want to show you a couple of pretty extreme examples, even more of the attack or prey capture specializations. There's basically too many to talk about because that's the fun one. The shark suck is the fun one. So I'll just show you guys some gifs that you can react however you want. So here's a goblin shark. So you guys know that there's skull mobility, aka a hyostylic jaw suspension in elasmobranchs. And so there's that palatal-quadrate upper jaw and mecus cartilage lower jaw with teeth homologous to your teeth attached. And so it can detach it from the brain case to engulf the fish, and the water goes out through the gills. That's pretty fun. You saw this in lab already, but here's an angel shark being camouflaged and doing the same thing. Sucking in another shark, a little small shark. So that's a very good ambush predator. There's almost no movement at all. You just get close enough. Perhaps one of my favorites, sling jaw wrasse. So that's a teleos. Look at that mobile premaxilla, plus a lot of other stuff. Because it can shoot its jaws so far forward and there's skin connecting all those bones, just by sending it out, it creates a vacuum. So any little fish or any little invertebrate that's in the way gets sucked in pretty passively. I like that because it's like a normal fish face until it really isn't. One of the great tetrapod far away from you prey capture adaptations is the chameleon. So the chameleons have a part of their original, like in the invertebrates, like the gill structure, it's like a rod in their tongue. So you can actually see it here. There's bone. There's bone right here. And then the actual tongue has a pad on the end of it that has a sticky substance to grab that grasshopper or that spider or whatever it is. But that is a pretty extreme tongue adaptation. So you can see animals in the water can use the water to their advantage. They can use the vacuum of water to get their prey. Animals on land have even more extreme adaptations to reach far away from their bodies, in this case, between the branches of trees, to get the prey in their system. What I also like is that these are all really cool and they show you like this working. I always like to show how it doesn't work most of the time. So here's a good example of that. The frog using its tongue, that is extremely impressive, but absolutely missing. So frogs also, and salamanders, have a tongue shooting ability. And they also have a bony structure in their tongue that the muscular part can snap out and is very elastic, but then there's a bony rod that they shoot up from their chest. That's part of the process. I love the arm sweep too. No, didn't happen. Okay. I want to talk about some more specific specializations now in the prey capture and attack. And we are going to spend a minute on this, and it's going to take what it takes because I love this so much. So those oceanic food webs you guys saw are absolutely based on the plankton. The bottom of the food pyramid in most all ocean or even freshwater food webs is going to be something like plankton. So plankton is a giant word. Plankton means any microscopic or very, very small life. Teeny little baby fishes, even if they're going to grow up to be humongous sharks, are still part of the plankton when they're floating in there. A little baby swordfish that's this long, that'll eventually be 20 feet long, 15 feet long, is part of the plankton. So there's phytoplankton and zooplankton, the plants of the plankton, the animals of the plankton. The plankton is that big catch-all word for everybody who's just floating with the current, and it's very tiny. There are tons of vertebrates that are specialized at eating the plankton. Talk to each other for a second about that.
So you have that.
All right, so what are some challenges that are going to be happening for eating plankton?
You have to eat a lot.
You have to eat a lot of it. They are individually very tiny. What else?
Because they're very tiny, detecting that might be difficult.
Might be hard to find them, especially if you're like looking for like each one. Might be hard to find them. What other things?
Gotta keep them in your-
Gotta keep them in your mouth. How do you get them out of there? How do you get them out of the water? How do you actually bring them into your body, right? And so those are all great. I really appreciate that. They're small, they're diffuse, you have to find them. You have to eat a lot for it to be worth it. And that's something that's very, very, very interesting. So there's lots of adaptations these animals have. These are baby lampreys. If you guys might remember from our diversity lectures, some lamprey species, when they're babies, are just little filter feeders. They bring in water through their mouths and it goes out their gills. These are all adult fishes of different species, and they're all in the process of filter feeding their plankton right now. And so a lot of those actinopterygians, those fishes up there, they have these things called gill rakers. And so you guys saw yesterday when the bowfin was dissected, the structure of the gill, the part that's soft where the blood can interchange oxygen with the water, that's there. But there's also that bony support structure of the gill arch. There's multiple ones in each fish. And so many, many, many filter feeding actinopterygians on the inside surface of their gill rakers have these extensions that like create a mesh. So they actually are like catching the fish, or catching the plankton as it goes through their mouths and out over their gills. It stops, it filters out the plankton. Then they can shut their mouths, scrape all that plankton off the gill rakers, and then they have it already contained. So that is one of the big challenges of eating plankton, is how do you get them out of the water and into your body? Fishes can let them pass through their face and then just like sieve them out. An important distinction I want you guys to have in mind is that these lampreys are doing something that like a lot of filter feeding invertebrates are doing, or maybe like a sponge or a tunicate is doing. We call it suspension feeding. They're standing still and they're pumping water through their bodies. They're sitting still, I guess. They're laying still and they're pumping water through their bodies. That's called suspension feeding. All these fishes are filter feeding, and even more specifically than that, they are ram feeding. They have their mouth open and they're forcing the water through their bodies in order to filter out the plankton. These are very different ways of doing similar things. There's a lot of great examples of filter feeding fishes that are suspension feeding, that are filter feeding and they're ram feeding. The talk title slide for today for carnivores was this one. I think one of the great animals on the planet right now, really, really, really big manta rays, the biggest of which can be like 20 feet across almost. Huge things, flying with their pectoral fins. They have amazing adaptations that are very specific to their diet. They have these, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name for them. These extensions off their face, these like, oh my gosh, they're not called flaps. These scoop kind of structures that stick out like this normally, but when they filter feed, they can elongate them and make them touch. So they have this like hoop out in front of their mouth. They can open their mouth very, 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 very wide. This one is upside down right now. And so there are all of its gills. It's a ray, so the gills are on the bottom of its body, the ventral surface of its body. And so it can create this like funnel that water goes through. The water goes through the gills and out over the gills, and it is filter feeding out all of the plankton. So here's a manta ray feeding. It's just doing laps in an area where there is a lot of plankton. You can see there's fishes that are also eating on the plankton. And so that is how one of the coolest animals in the world like eats, is it just does somersaults or backflips, whatever you want to think of it as, with its like palp things extended. And look how open the gills are when it comes upside down. That is a huge animal successfully getting many, 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 many small, maybe plants, but mostly animals, out of the water and into its enormous body. Here's some more chondrichthyans. So this is again, still filter feeding, still ram feeding, just like a little anchovy would do, kind of similar to what that manta ray was just doing. Here's a whale shark taking in water. That water passes through its mouth, out over its gills, and it's got those rakers on the inside of its gills. Here's one of the rarest sharks in the world. It's a megamouth shark. Only a few of them have ever been caught or pulled out of the ocean. And then here's another really great big shark called the basking shark. These three sharks are not closely related. They're completely different orders of shark. Talk to me about these filter feeding chondrichthyans. You can think about the manta ray too if you want.
Yeah.
All right, what are some observations about these three different sharks? Manta ray too, if you want, like I said. Not very big teeth, or in the case of the whale shark and the basking shark and the manta ray, no teeth. 0 teeth. Huge shark, no teeth. What else? They're very big. There is a pattern that we see again and again and again and again in vertebrate evolution, that ocean-going planktivores are always the biggest animals. That is an ecological pattern. If you can get enough ocean into your body, there's enough food there that you can get huge. And then what's interesting is that that maximum body size is limited by the physiology of the kind of animal that you are. So really big sharks, even back in the fossil record, all kind of top out about the big as a whale shark is today. There are other filter feeding sharks from the past. Basking sharks are also huge. Big animals are probably filter feeding. That is a very cool observation. No teeth. What else? This is also like the biggest ray. Does this. Here's the biggest sharks. And this one's technically the biggest fish right now on the world. Anything else? Yeah, Franny. Yeah. Great question. I bet they do. I have no idea. I bet they're reduced. I don't know that. That's a really good question. I'm sure they have the Ampullae of Lorenzini, but they are doing a completely different kind of foraging than most Chondrichthyans are doing. So I bet you they're reduced. That's an awesome question. I don't know the answer to that. When I say giant, when I say filter feeding, what do you actually think of? The biggest animals ever, no dinosaurs bigger. The biggest animals ever are plankton specialists, and actually are alive right now. So the most extreme examples of this, and again, this is why we're thinking ecologically, not always evolutionarily. Those three sharks evolved that suite of characters, the giant mouth that can run up, the huge gill rakers, the no teeth. They all evolved that on their own within their own shark families. Here's a mammal, it's actually a hoofed mammal, or it used to be, that has also evolved to be a filter feeder. It is filter feeding, but it is not ram feeding. We say a whale is lunge feeding. What's the difference for a whale versus all those sharks and rays and herrings and mackerels and all that? It breathes air. So what does that mean for filter feeding?
Gills.
Those gills are super sweet. You're breathing with them. You've been breathing with them for hundreds of millions of years. But if they have little extensions on them that they can also filter plankton for you, that's evolved a ton of times in gilled vertebrates. This is an animal with a lung. There is no water pass through. So whales do not let the ocean go through their big mouths and out the back. They have to have these enormous extensions of their mouth, extensions of their throat. They swallow an unbelievable amount of ocean water all at the same time. And then what do? They push it out with their tongue, and what they have is this structure. Do you know what these are? This is a whale, like we're chopping through its face. So like its eyeballs would be here, and that's the forward direction. So you're seeing this is the tongue when it took in the water. Here's the tongue pushing the water out. What's this though? Baleen. Baleen whales have these keratinized structures that are, guess what, homologous to mammalian hair. They're just special hair, so it's a mammal thing, hanging from the top jaw. So once they get a bunch of fish and a bunch of krill and a bunch of plankton in their mouths, they have to sit there for a long time and use their tongues to push all that water out of their humongous extended belly thing to get the plankton stuck on the outside, the inside of the plankton, and then they can use their tongue to just scrape it all back into their throats. So it's a way crazier process than the gill rakers, right? But it's still filter feeding. They're not ramming the water through their bodies. They have to make a lunge to capture a huge amount of water and hopefully a bunch of fish and krill and plankton, and then use their tongues to pump it all out. This suite of anatomical adaptations is all about diet and it's completely crazy. It's extremely extreme. There's plenty of different ways whales do this though. Gray whales have relatively reduced baleen on their upper jaw. They go to the bottom of the ocean and they filter out things from like the mud. So blue whales are up in the surface waters, like going through big clouds of animals. Gray whales are going down into the mud. There's also really extreme whales like these bowhead whales that take in water like this from the front. They don't do a big mouth swallow with like a big belly distension, but they have a huge way to like open their mouth. So there's a bunch of anterior facing water in, and then they shut it relatively small amounts to like a blue whale, and then do the same thing with their tongue where they filter it out over the baleen. So a couple different ways baleen whales use their baleen, their mouth geometry can help us figure that out. But of course, I wanted to show you guys them really doing it. So this is a GIF of like a 80-foot blue whale eating millions of animals at the same time, which I think is just fantastic. So huge belly distension. It's really the throat and mouth. But all those pleats on the underside of the whale just totally fill out because it cannot just pump the water over gills. It has to process all those krill, which are not completely gone. I guess there's a little streak left, but that is a lot of little crustaceans that no longer exist on their own anymore. So that's how blue whales do it. They kind of do surface things at the front. You guys probably have seen humpbacks. Humpbacks are maybe the like coolest. So I'll let you take this in and what you're really seeing. So it's a ball of fish. I like the sharks being like, oh geez. Gotta get out of the way when the whale comes through.
These animals, then, or these just absolutely massive.
Yeah. This also looks to me like a particularly unsuccessful strike. Those fish are all getting out of the way too. But now that his throat pleats are now completely full, so he's gonna take all the time to pump all that water out.
Use the shark, then he has to spit all of it out.
If he has a shark in there.
Yeah, he just has to open his mouth.
Oh, and there's known that you can watch videos of people who have been swallowed too. Like humans that have been diving and then they're in the whale's mouth for a second and they get spit out. Yeah, it's not good. They get hurt, but not bit really. And then here's a gray whale filter feeding the bottom. So they go into the mud, like I said, and they pump out, and they're looking for mostly like larger invertebrates. It's still like a weird kind of filter feeding. It's not really the plankton, but it's still using baleen to filter out their prey. Has anybody ever gone whale watching and seen gray whales at all?
Not gray whales, but I've seen humpback whales bubble netting before.
Oh, good. We're gonna talk about bubble netting. Gray whales, I encourage you if you can go see them. They just smell terrible because they eat mud. So like their breath and their other releases are like a nightmare. Like they don't smell fishy like a whale does. They smell like putrid. All right, last thing we'll do here today, because it is 12:14, is just another example of terrestrial filter feeding that I think is too much fun. Not a lot of birds filter feed, but there are a couple. So this is a flamingo. It filter feeds, but it does a thing called pump feeding. The flamingo takes in water into its mouth, and you can see it has these little extensions on its tongue and on its beak that make a little sieve that invertebrates can go through. So here's a flamingo bill in cross section. This is the lower jaw. This is the flamingo's tongue, and then here's the upper jaw. That's how it's shaped in cross section with these little combs. And so if you ever go to a zoo, or if you see one in the wild, because you're lucky, this is what flamingos are doing underwater all day, is filter feeding little freshwater, sometimes saltwater invertebrates out of the ocean. But there is terrestrial filter feeding too. They just put their faces under the water. All right, we'll keep talking about carnivory and herbivory on Thursday. Thank you.
I talked about whales too, almost.
You can say whatever you'd like.
The gray whale is